My name is Willem Buys. I'm a goldsmith by trade. I've made a little silver ship a couple of years back as a commission. The little ship was totally designed and built by myself. It weighs about 116 grams silver in total. I did video footage of the whole process for my own reference. It had a lot of different thinking to do, in the sense that silver is difficult to keep shiny and polish up. When you solder on it, it tarnishes. It gets a fire scale on it that's difficult to remove. So I had to assemble the ship afterwards in pieces so that I can still get in and polish it and clean it. And eventually it's all just held together with a rigging, because if I had to solder it, I can't get in there and clean it. I had the chance now to put it into something that I think would be appreciated by other people. This is just making the wax molds for the small ships to be cast in silver later. That's the rubber mold for the hull of the ship, 2-part squish mold. A bit of weight to not float the top. This one had a couple of defects in it, bubbles. If they're tiny enough, we can fix them up. If they're too big, then I'll rather recast another one and see what that one comes out at. Much better. And cleaning all the rough edges, preparing it for casting, filling up tiny little holes. You don't want the bubbles in the wax when you cast it. It can cause problems with the lost wax process. Fitting the two halves together, so then it can be cast as one solid unit and I don't have to solder it together later on. Making sure that the seam is nicely filled up from both sides. Cleaning off the seam on the outside, that would be more visible. A bit of methylated spirits to clean off all the stickiness. Injection wax tends to be a bit sticky and a lot of stuff can stick to it. And this is the sprue up of the little ones. Making sure it will fit in the flask. This flask had 2 little pigs attached as well for a different project, but it was cast at the same time. Ready for investment. Mixing the investment. It's like a plaster of Paris, high heat porosity to facilitate with lost wax casting process. vacuuming the investment to get rid of all the bubbles. And with a vibrating table, pouring the investment to get rid of bubbles maybe attached to the sides of the waxes. These are different pours as well. It's not all just for the ship, because we fill the oven for casting with as much as we can. Loading the oven, open side to the bottom, marked as silver so I know which is which. It ran through a 9-hour cycle for the casting to de-wax the molds. And now I'm busy preparing the metal for the casting. Melting is done with oxy and propane. The flask is at a temperature of 610 degrees Celsius, goes onto a vacuum table. A vacuum is switched on and the molten metal is poured into the flask, and the air is sucked out by the vacuum through the porosity of the casting material. Demolding, getting rid of all the investment, and some castings ready to be cleaned. Removing the cast pieces from the sprue base. And cleaning the sprues. I wish I worked that fast. All scraps are saved to be reused. This is preparing to cast plate to roll for the sails and the deck. It's a cast iron plate mold. It is about 3 to 4 millimeters thick, and whatever width you want to set it. Now it is rolling the metal to reduce the thickness. This can take a while. Lots of annealing in between to keep the metal from cracking. Getting quite thin. That's about 0.4. Templates for the sails. Being transferred onto the plate. There is some bubbles and defects in the plate, so working around that to get the best pieces out. This is bar stock that also was cast and being rolled thinner now in the square side to produce the wire needed for the masts, the sails and the rigging. Masts is about 1.6 millimeters thick. The rest of the rigging is all about 0.3 millimeters. Again, need to be annealed and softened. And obviously getting longer and longer, so eventually I'll cut it into shorter pieces. Square tip reduced. Now it's going through a draw plate to turn the square into a round. A little bit of beeswax on the surface makes it slide through easy. This also hardens the wire and stretches it out, so annealing also will be needed to keep it nice and soft and workable. It still needs to go down thinner. There is also some cracking and splitting on the wire. It sometimes happens. That's a 0.65. I think there was some thinner wire that I used on the twists, and I think that was thinner than the 0.3 millimeters. This is the hole preparing to be cast. New silver grain as purchased from my suppliers. The hole takes a bit extra silver to make sure that you got enough to cast. I added a couple of extra small little boats on the side just for in case. This is not a standard rubber, so I need to seal the base to the flask, and it's also done just with the same wax. In the oven for the cook-off. Setting the ramp times and soak times of the program. This is a very old controller still. And this is the casting of the big boy, the hole. On the vacuum table. Vacuum on. And metal in. There's a high heat silicone pad between the flask and the vacuum table to make a nice seal. Cleaning out. And the hole. This one came out good. And again, removing from the base. Here we've got the hole. Removing bulk on the inside. The inside, it needed to be hollow to reduce weight and the mounting on the sculpture where it is going to sit. Cleaning the hole. And this is literally slowly working, filing and then getting all the little marks and stuff out and eventually polishing it. Flattening the top. This is marking the inside where the deck groove is going to be cut, so that once the deck goes in, it lies in the groove. This is cutting the deck groove. Now anything above the deck groove needs to be nicely cleaned and polished, because that would be visible. Template for the deck, make sure that it will fit. This is bending the hull a little bit to get the deck to sit correctly. A little bit more force required. The groove. This is the deck that's being cut into silver plate. The deck needs to clip into the groove because there's no soldering involved to getting the deck in there. Silver tends to become very difficult to solder and then clean when you can't get in later. It makes it very difficult. So I did this with a bit more rigging involved. These are the sails, again cutting, marking with a template. Being a 0.3mm thick silver, it is fairly easy to cut. Making sure which mast goes with which sails. This is the closing up the back of the ship. I don't know if you can call it a wheelhouse or something, but it is covered, the back part is covered. And that gets soldered on because I can still get in there to clean it. And a little bit of swaging and hammering to get it nice crisp corner. Fits in on top of the deck. This is again refining the sails profiles and getting them to the correct size. That's the first mast. That's the rear one. And that is my templates or my reference from the previous one that I've made. Now it's bending the sails into shape. Cleaning every paper. Bending a thin one on a piece of leather as a backing to get the groove in nice. On such a narrow piece is not that easy, so I use the leather as a backing. This one cracked, and so it will have to be redone. Checking with my template to see if it will fit. Now I'm marking the position for the front bowsprit. Getting the angle correct and filing a little groove in the hole where it will sit. This is the back sail. These are the side little ships on the side. This is supposed to be a whaling ship. So these were the whaling canoes that they used to actually go and harpoon the whale. So these ones need to be attached to the ship, and I've done that via these little hanging brackets, and they all need to be from square shaven down to a point. I drilled some marking spots on them for pins that need to be soldered later. Looked for the best ones and cleaned off some more cleaning. I made jump rings. These are little rings that I'm going to put on the bottom of the mast so that when they go make a step for the mast to stop on the hull. These are the so-called blubber burners that I just made a little block with a wire on it to represent the chimney. But attaching these to the hull as well, you will see later that I pinned them. I did not solder them because that is where it becomes difficult to clean after soldering on silver. So I had to use pinning and riveting to make sure that I can fit them later. These are the little plates that sits at the bottom of the masts to attach the rigging to. Each mast gets one, and then some of the rigging attaches to that. The pieces with the holes are bent up so that I can hook the rigging through that. Clean up. It's a lot of fiddly little parts, and then the assembly happens later. Drilling the center hole for the mast to pass through. Okay, these are the little boat hangers being assembled. These are actually on top of the deck there is a rig with two little boats upside down on that, and those are the little supposedly blubber boilers that I also soldered the pins on. And well, the chimney and becomes one of the pins to hold it in position. It is a fire brick, I would say, and it's fairly soft, so that's why I push normal clothing pins into it to keep the components in position. This is flux being applied with a syringe. These ones all also get a little pin attached that gets used later to attach it to the hull of the ship. This is the other wire that gets soldered onto the bottom of them to form the hook when attaching it to the deck. Silver solder, I buy them in blocks, rolled up. They're about 1/2 mil thick. I think you can see it just at the top of the brick there, and cut it with the snips. This is the pins that I solder onto the brackets for the boat that later will be used to attach the boat to the hull. Everyone gets snipped off. Pickling, cleaning all the flux and dirt off the pieces. To space the little arms for the side boats. Again, the block being nice and soft, I push the mounting pin in and then solder the little boat. These ones also needed support because they're hanging off the side, so to get them in the right position, pinned them and soldered. Cleaning after soldering. And that is the problem with silver, is it becomes progressively difficult to get in and clean and polish parts after soldering. So the pinning and riveting type thing that I used in this construction made it easier to get in eventually and clean the components before they got attached. The disc that I used there was plastic backing with emery paper on it. And this is a little rubber wheel that's got different grids, abrasive wheel. We call it a rubber wheel. Threading the bases of the masts. Well, the mast is 1.6 millimeters thick, so it's a very fine thread that gets cut on there. The little jump rings previously made. And this is the nut for the bottom of the masts. Again, threading tiny little holes. And cutting them apart. Drilling the holes for the masts into the deck. Fitting the bowsprit again, making sure, and now it's soldering the little jump rings and the bowsprit on the first mast. Fitting the bowsprit onto the front mast. Cleaning again. And this is the first piece where attaching with hooks become prevalent, because I cannot put that on and solder it, because then I cannot clean underneath it. It needs to shine. This is starting to put the rigging onto the sails. The purple is a mixture of borax and methylated spirits. It is to try and prevent fire scale forming on the silver. It is something that just happens on the silver. It's an oxidation layer, and it is fairly difficult to remove it. So if you can prevent it, we try and prevent it. Just some more sail assembly. Just the top of each sail gets attached to the mast. Bending the wires in rough position where I need them. It is not that easy to attach a 0.3 millimeter wire to a 0.3 millimeter thick flat piece of plates. That's the front one being assembled. The front one has got 2 extra sails going onto the bowsprit. Making sure that the solder flowed. And each rigging from the one sail gets taken down to the next one. It's just ease of assembling. Now the sails are getting bent in the final positions. Fitting the bowsprit on the sail. That's the front sail assembly. Now this is soldering the back half on the hull. Now the cleaning starts on all of these sail components, sticking them all in a tumbler. So this is more of a hard plastic ceramic type bead. It gives it a nice uniform polish or clean. After this, there's not any more soldering done to them because I can get into clean now. That is the stainless steel shot that gives it a more burnishing the silver, and again it gets into areas where you can't really get in with any other way of polishing it. That is pre-assembly. This is final polishing and cleaning up the hull. Bending the top of the post over to simulate hanging rigging so that you can lower the little boat when needed. Doing a bit of final polishing on the sails, and there is a lot of that. And just when you think you're finished, then you see some more marks, and then you go back and polish some more. Pre-assemble all the materials, all the sails and deck, little ships ready for assembly. This is mounting the blubber burners. So this is final assembly on the deck part, where those little boats on the top are getting crimped onto the deck. Now the sails get attached with a plate at the bottom for the rest of the rigging. Through the hole, the little nut gets tightened. First one on. Getting the little grooves cut and the rigging bent into the bottom. Yeah, I'm just using a bit of masking tape to cover the hole for protection while I'm busy assembling all the rest. Pushing against the peg or pushing against something to stop scratches from forming. Final assembly of the hull and deck. Yeah, I had to use a bit more pressure to get the deck into position and try not to make scratches on it because I cannot get in there to clean it. It gets a bit tricky to try and push it in to click in the groove. I'm attaching some of the thinner rigging here. The bowsprit rigging is actually one piece that's put in from the inside to the outside and then attached to the bowsprit to hold it in position. This is of the 0.3mm thick wire rigging that's been attached now around the top of the mast and down to the little plates at the bottom. some of the rigging going into the hull, and that locks the deck and sails to the hull of the ship. Reference photos from the previous one that I made too. All these rigging were done with a 0.3 millimeter wire, silver wire. Now the location of the little side ships are drilled, and the rigging for them, the whole locations are drilled for their pins. And now the little side boats, it's close to the end now. Special tool made out of an old nail to bend the wires on the inside so that they stay there. Removing the masking tape. The little silver ship weighing in at about 116 grams of sterling silver.